welcome to another episode of Brain Balance Live. My name is Jen. I'm a fellow Brain Balance mom, and as always, I am joined by Heather Wells, your local, if you're in Texas, Brain Balance Center person who is just going to give us all kinds of knowledge to help us with our daily struggles. How are you today, Heather?
Well, I don't think I've been having quite as much fun as you. Jen
I
just
did a
got back.
flash mob today.
Flash mob.
Hey.
That's so fun.
Yes, it was super fun, to pop up in places where people are not expecting any dancing to happen, and suddenly there's dancing.
That sounds like a good time. Do you have video of it? I want to see it later.
You know what? I think there will be video, and I promise you I will share it.
Okay.
Today's topic is going to be selective attention. Kind of if we notice that our kids are kind of focusing in places that maybe aren't so important and we want them focused in others. Heather's going to help us navigate that a little bit. And if you have not been to the show before, just know that Heather is a board certified cognitive specialist. She's also a therapist and just a wealth of knowledge when it comes to neurodiversity and really the struggles of adults and children. So Heather, how are we going to tackle this topic today?
Well, I get asked all the time or just comments, and it makes sense. Like, it just seems like my child, if they want to pay attention, they will. If they don't want to, they don't. If they're interested in the topic, they can focus for hours. If it's schoolwork, they won't. Or if I'm talking to them, 2 seconds. And I know it looks like a choice. We're going to talk about a lot of underlying reasons for inconsistent attention. And so let's just go ahead and jump on into the first slide. And I'm going to give you a lot of factors to consider and some questions to ask yourselves, ask your kids, depending upon their age, or to consider for yourself. A lot of times tasks we're doing look like they're kind of calling upon some of the same skills, and it's not necessarily the truth. There are many types of attention. Most of the time when people hear, issues with attention, they often think of sustained attention. What is the attention span? How long can my child focus? And that actually, and this show is for people with or without a diagnosis of ADHD, anything where you're concerned about attention and distractibility. But that is only one type. And focused attention is directing attention specifically to visual or auditory information. And so if you have kids with sensory processing struggles, that can be confusing. Auditory processing challenges often look like an attention issue. Think about, do they just have difficulty focusing on auditory information, or does it not matter the mode of delivery of the information? Selective attention, you have to filter extraneous stimuli and know what to focus on. Number one, I have to know what's relevant and irrelevant right now. If you have kids who struggle with word problems, they often have difficulty knowing what's relevant and irrelevant to solve the question, because they always throw in information that is not relevant. That might be a sign of difficulty with big picture details, what's relevant, what's not. And the other thing about that is you have to have self-regulation. I'm supposed to be doing this, but man, there's stuff going on over here. It's very hard to resist. And if they're impulsive or lacking self-control, I can't resist. And now they're getting, the fray is getting in the way. That can also be auditory processing, though, by the way. They can't filter out extraneous noise, for example, or visual fray. Alternating attention requires flexibility. For example, let's say your child is sitting in class, someone drops a big book, loud bang. Human nature is, I'm going to check it out. What just happened? Cognitive flexibility allows me to immediately switch gears and get right back on what the teacher is saying. Same thing if you're talking to them, younger sister's crying, I check it out, but now I'm right back with mom or dad. So if you have kids who, I'm right, you're wrong, everything's great, everything's horrible, black, white, that is a flexibility issue. Now, divided attention, what research really shows us is when we think we're dividing attention, which we are it's sort of forced upon us as parents, or you work in a busy office environment or something, phones are ringing, kids are tugging on you. But in reality, in the brain, we are quickly switching back and forth from one thing to another. Your productivity is usually about 50% less when you think you're multitasking. But a caveat to that is if it is something that involves no thought, muscle memory, you don't even have to think about what you're doing. A lot of kids who struggle with focus actually focus better if they fidget with something, for example, as long as the fidget does not, as long as it's not visually appealing, where they get stuck, where it becomes a distraction, but it's more like tactile and non-obtrusive, then that may improve their focus, and they are technically dividing attention a little bit, but such a small amount of gas is going to the fidget.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yes.
So we have a problem in our household where my son likes to watch TV while he's eating, and Corey always wants to turn it off because he feels like his attention is in two places and that that's not good for him. It's like feeding a negative quality in his brain. Is that like in the same category? Do you feel the same way, or do you feel like no, eating and watching TV is fine?
Of course, that's up to each household. I think in general, it's really good to have a house rule that electronics are off, because you need quality connected time. There's nothing more important than that. And the kids are not having the TV on so that they can focus on your conversation better. I mean, they're going to be watching TV in most cases.
Yes.
Now, separate from that, but a caveat to that, a lot of kids find that they will tell their parents, I can focus better on my homework if music is playing. And that seems very counterintuitive. However, it does work for some people.
Yeah.
One of the reasons my recommendation is to have them listen to music without lyrics, because that tends to be more distracting. But sometimes the beat of the music is sort of, they might have time blindness that we talked about last week, and that kind of gives them a rhythm to their work.
Okay.
Another thing is, because a tiny bit of fuel is going to processing the music, that might take the place of rumination or overthinking a project or getting worked up about it. And so those can kind of balance each other out. But a lot of us will not focus as well with music. And so, experiment, play around. But I think the TV thing in most cases is different.
Okay. It's this thing of like thinking that ADHD brain, can they multitask better than a neurotypical brain?
What ADHD really is, what the experts in the last 15 years or so are saying is, it's not an inability to attend. It's an issue of regulation. It's an issue of working memory. It's an issue, which we're going to talk about. It's an issue of regulating what you attend to. And we're going to talk about some things that really fuel the ADHD brain that I think will play in with that question on some of these other slides too.
Okay,
so
perfect.
Just keep in mind, there are many types of attention. So maybe when they're focusing well on something, they're using one of these types, and then for a different task, a completely different type of focus is required. And so sensory or cognitive flexibility, et cetera, can really impact how well they can focus. But there are many more things to come here. Okay, let's move on. Another type of attention that's not on this slide, it's hyperfocus. It is very, very common in those diagnosed with ADHD, as well as some others of us. But hyperfocus is not the same thing as flow. We talked about flow last week when I said this is the state that writers want to get in. The ideas are just pouring out. I mean, everything's just gelling. It's challenging, but also you're accomplishing something. So then that's rewarding, and you keep going. You're like, wow, I wish I could produce this much all the time.
Yeah.
But the difference is hyperfocus, most of the time it's intermittent. You can't predict when it's going to happen. And a lot of times this can be used on something that's not super helpful, like video games. And because of their time blindness, they don't realize they just did that for 3 hours. And that is kind of creating a dopamine that the real world doesn't provide that keeps them going. So it's unpredictable. They are not faking because they could focus on that and not the other thing. And we're going to talk even more about that. But the benefit is if it is on the right thing, man, talk about exceptional productivity. But most of the time, that's only going to happen on a task they find inherently interesting. But so many times the hyperfocus ends up being sort of an avoidance. It's time spent on distractions to avoid unpleasant responsibilities. This can be subconscious, though. It doesn't mean that they decided they're going to zone out and do that for 6 hours. And now it's late at night and I haven't started my paper that's due tomorrow. But one thing to really, this is not as easy as it sounds, but to really work on paying attention to what you are paying attention to and what you're not paying attention to. And that requires a lot of self-awareness. But I know of a college student who said, man, just hearing that, I started realizing, and she started talking about specific things in the room that she was paying attention to. And once she was aware of that, as soon as she would catch herself doing it, she would bring herself back to the teacher. She said it made a world of difference.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's move on. Now, another thing to consider, is it a true issue with focus, or is it distractibility? Not all issues with attention come from distractibility. All distractibility leads to inattention, but a lot of times the sources are quite different. I mean, in the middle, I mean, it can be like, oh, thinking about my girlfriend, or the fight. It could be gaga, or, you know, or the baseball game that's coming up. It could be anything. A lot of times when kids with ADHD, or any of us really, are daydreaming, sometimes it's about something pleasant, that big victory on Saturday. But if it's obsessiveness, think of, and I mean with or without a diagnosis of obsessive compulsive disorder, but if you have kids who have obsessive thoughts and ruminate and kind of get on a loop of thinking and it's hard to switch gears, a lot of times those types of thoughts are not pleasant. You're worked up about something. It's like, a very sort of an example that you would see on a movie or something. Did I like the door? Did I like the door? How many times did I wash my hands? Did I wash it an even number of times? Those are more stereotypical and they're real, but it can be anything about, I can't believe Jason said that to me. What did I ever do to him? What could I have done to, like, just getting in a loop like that, or nobody likes me. This is not fair. So, it's good to talk to your kids about what they're daydreaming about. And if it is that type of thing, that might be something else going on. Now, kids or adults with ADHD or ish types of symptoms, with or without the diagnosis, can have obsessive tendencies. But when it comes to taking care of these things, it's like, what's the primary thing and what's secondary? And that really does impact how you want to tackle it. Now, in the left, you see the phone ringing and bells going off and notifications on the phone and people talking in the background. That can distract anyone. This could be a sensory issue, or it could just be, we need to make some environmental modifications.
We need to set some boundaries.
Right. And I just want to keep in mind too, I know we talk about this a lot, but it's so important. A lot of times we think about auditory distractions. Visual distractions are just as real. It's, they may not be as evident, but they need to have some blank space. This is in classrooms. This is in homework spaces. Have some stuff where it has some personality and character. They like the area they're working in to get positive emotions going. But it doesn't need to be cluttered, because cluttered environment is cluttered mind. And since kids with ADHD have difficulty knowing what thing to attend to and selecting which thing to attend to, that makes it even harder. We're adding to their cognitive load before they even get to the work. And impulsivity, is it just that they can't resist? That's more fun. I want to do this. And they can't stay seated, and then, or they look out the window and now they're off to the races. Sensory processing disorder can often co-occur or get misdiagnosed as ADHD. And sometimes sensory processing challenges are not obvious. It does not mean that kids are covering their ears or they have an abnormal response to hot, cold, pain, etc. Sometimes these things are fairly hidden. It doesn't mean it's a how much issue, which is what people think of. It can be an accuracy issue. We have kids whose eye tracking is off when they read. Their eyes are skipping around. They're working so hard to, what I missed, where are the words, that then it impacts comprehension, that they're working so hard on the eye tracking that they don't have any juice left to focus. There are many different kinds of visual perception and processing issues that have symptoms that look exactly like ADHD. And those are almost never thought of. They are very easy to overlook unless you do a thorough assessment. Sometimes I don't know what to focus on. This feels overwhelming. When I think about this project, everything's the big deal. There are no supporting characters in this. And I don't know where to start, so I don't start at all. I don't understand this. So if your kids have learning difficulties, learning differences, that is something else. They are using up their mental sketch pad on trying to figure out things that might be automated for other kids. They don't have any focus left. So, and then as you can see, if anybody's wondering, like, what are reasonable expectations for attention span, you can see I have them here. Age 6, 12 to 18 minutes, age 10, 20 to 30, age 14, 45 minutes. Doesn't mean you shouldn't have a 5-minute movement break in between those, but that is a reasonable expectation in typical development.
Okay.
And if you have kids with neurodevelopmental delays, we go by developmental age, not chronological age, as always. Okay, so let's move on. Here's another thing. Our brains their job number one is to protect us. So sometimes I'm working on an assignment. It could be a work project. It can be a chore at the house. And my brain is saying, would it be better if I did something else with this energy? It doesn't mean that it's actually more productive or a better idea. Would I enjoy it more? If I'm going to put all this effort into it, what can I do that's more fun? And so, if you ever wonder why is it more effortful to do math than to play a video game, it is because think about how much muscle memory is involved in video games. A lot of the same skills aren't required. If you're writing, you have to have the left and right hemisphere of the brain communicating, the front and the back. You're crossing the midline to right. You're using visual perception, auditory processing. Video game, thumb, and I'm just doing this, and I'm not even really using hand-eye coordination nearly as much as it seems. And it's fun, and so then these reward chemicals get released in the brain, and that fuels me to keep going. So what you want to do is decrease the accessibility of easier dopamine-producing alternatives. So I know this seems obvious, but there are really interesting studies that if you put certain remotes or game controls or your phone on a shelf where you have to get up and walk across the room to get it, how much less likely you are to give into that. The other thing is the brain is more likely to go to that, wanting to do those things if they're accessible. And a lot of times at this time of day, that's what I do. But if you create new habits or house rules that during this time, it's electronics free, during this time, then how rewarding or not, or how challenging a task seems, it is always compared to what the alternative is. Those aren't alternatives anymore. And that, I think, really applies to the TV question you asked me, that it's not even a possibility that that's what I'm doing during this time. It just switches your brain into a different gear.
Right.
Okay, let's move on. And I know we talk about this a lot. It just cannot be overstated. The ADHD brain, really all of us to one degree or another. I mean, if we find a task novel or interesting, then we are more likely to do it. Do you have any phone calls you dread and you put them off? Are there certain parts of your work day that they just keep getting pushed down the to-do list? I think most of us to one degree or another have certain tasks we kind of avoid or procrastinate on. It's a matter of degrees, I think, more than yes or no on that. But the ADHD brain has a need for curiosity and creativity. In fact, I read one of the doctors who has ADHD, psychiatrist who has worked for years and years and years, I think it was Hallowell, said, if you think about it, creativity is productive impulsivity. It's kind of without bounds, but then you're doing something productive with it. It's like it's kind of a need, like food and water. It's not just something they want. And he also talked about the right difficulty. And what that means is perpetual boredom is registered as stress in the brain. And I know I've said that before, but I think it bears repeating. That's not super evident. So it needs to be challenging enough that gets my intrigue up, but not so challenging that it's too much and I just shut down. And it needs to be in your wheelhouse, in your interest. It needs to be on that list of things that you hold near and dear in your life. So how can you connect what kids must do with things they care about? Bringing them background knowledge, how it relates to the sports team they're on, the vacation you took, if it's history class. What are their interests? What are their strengths? It is so good to make a regular practice of sitting down and talking about kids' strengths, having them come up with a list. Because they need to know they are a set. We all as human beings have a combination of strengths and struggles, and give them opportunities to cultivate those strengths and to feel good about themselves. And then that will carry over into the harder step. So that is intrinsic. That gets internal motivation going. If it is all about logistics, it's tedious, it's boring, memorizing, these are the right answers. We need to teach kids how to think, not what to think. Standardized tests, star test, isolated, drill. Memorization is good to a point, because the more automated certain information, I already know 6 times 6 is 36, so I use no mental energy on that part when I'm adding it to another part of a test question. But if I have to count my fingers or go through the Rolodex in my head to come up with what 6 times 6 is, I already am running out of steam before I get to the other part. That is one of the reasons why a lot of kids who have struggles, it's not evident in the early grades, because they are learning the building blocks, but then they're not really expected to do anything with them. The test really is 6 times 6 is 36. The older you get, you have brackets and parentheses. 6 times 6 is 36. Add that to this, minus this. Now convert it to a fraction or a percentage. Now let's put it in algebra and throw some X's in there. So if the basics aren't automated, they're already running out of bandwidth before they have to add other things to it. So getting by doesn't mean that they're going to be okay a little bit down the road. Get the basics early, catch it early, because the gaps widen. They just do. And there has been a study, like 2 preschoolers telling the story of the 3 little pigs. One just gets the very basic facts, built house, blew down, and really short sentences, not necessarily grammatically correct, but what he said was correct. Another child is using compound sentences and also knows the moral of the story. When you look at them 12, 13 years old, there's an over 5-year gap between where they are in literacy. Everything we build on early, we build on it, or it declines almost all the time. But also, one of the things that really causes issues with focus is when individuals think about what they're being deprived of the video game, being deprived of the time with friends that they wanted to spend. Really help them start focusing on the benefits and what they're gaining from doing it, how it's going to help them reach a goal that they have, and how it applies to what they want to do with their life if they're older, for a career, or how it's going to help them get a job, or how it's going to help them be independent. You grow responsibility, and then you earn more privileges. Okay, but tasks on the right increase dopamine. That is a reward and motivation chemical in the brain, and kids cannot help that their brain favorably responds chemically to activities they enjoy. I know it's frustrating. This was my voice to a T, but I think really this is just fact. They can't help it. Doesn't mean they can't help some of their attitudes about other things, but there's more to the story. It's not just choice. I'm not saying there's zero choice involved, but it is less choice and more about this kind of thing. Okay, let's move on. And is there cognitive load at capacity? We all have a ceiling on how much cognitive load we can take at a time. We all have that. If you've ever had a stressful day at work and you get home and you just want silence, you want to veg out with a movie for a couple hours, you want that quiet time on Sunday afternoon, you're just up to here. Sometimes kids are lashing out when they're to that point. They've been holding it together and churning all day long. They're doing certain tasks that are supposed to be automated. But instead, because they have these struggles, they're sprinting. I can only sprint for so long. I'm up to here. And now lash out or pull back, withdrawal, task avoidance. And so what are some things that it's not just about grades. It's not just about, can my child do X, Y, Z? Can they do algebra? Can they read fluently? It's not just about that. How hard are they working to do it? How much fuel is their brain guzzling to get it done? Because if they are guzzling too much gas, it's not automated. It will rob out of other buckets. It can be the emotions bucket, behavior bucket, the comprehension bucket. They know how to read. It's just it's labored. Then it's going to take out of something else. If kids are struggling with writing, They have less fuel to get their thoughts onto paper. Lack of handwriting automaticity is highly predictive of the quality and the quantity of what kids write. Doesn't mean they're being lazy. I mean, I could go on and on, but just there are many things that will eat up our fuel. Number one, I'm having struggles. I get the grade, but I'm having to work too hard to do it, or I don't get the grade. But and then the behaviors, the communication that I'm working too hard at this, or the emotions are. It also, what things are they struggling with internally? What is the extrinsic environment favorable? Germane load has to do with how is the information being delivered that may require extra effort. I'll give you an example. If kids they have a worksheet they're doing, and the word choice is over here, and then they have to look at the directions at the top of the page, and then they have to go. If you have visual perception issues, I'm having to do all this stuff, and my eyes don't just go right to the point they need to. My eyes are bouncing around, and I just used up almost 25% of our brain's function is visual perception. So it can even be the way things are arranged on a worksheet. It can be that I have to look in this book and then come back to this book. That's another reason why once kids are writing research papers, I have to go to many sources to go back and forth and then combine it. Whereas when I was younger, it was all right here. Those are, if we deliver directions and we didn't make sure we had their attention, and it's a noisy environment, I'm having to filter out that environment. That doesn't come naturally for me like it does for you. And so now I have less cognitive fuel to pay attention to what the directions were. So we want to say things simply. If your kids have trouble with multi-step instructions, give them single-step instructions. Have them repeat it back to you in their words. Have a code word that they need to say so that you know you have their attention before you start talking. If they have body awareness, equilibrium issues, spatial issues with spatial concepts, if you have space invaders, sometimes it's not obvious until we test, but they may have more difficulty if they have directions to follow in different rooms. So play games where you're practicing directional words. Look for patterns to what's holding them back. But once I am up to this, not only might you see behaviors and emotions or withdrawal and task avoidance, it's like, I used up all this fuel. I have to work too hard at reading. Now I only have this much space for focus, this much space for comprehension, this much space to regulate myself before I'm here, and then I'm getting in trouble. So how automated is their learning? It's not just about the grade. There is certain things are meant to be easy so they have room to handle the tough stuff. And if they're up to their lid, focus is going to go down. If they're doing something that is in their wheelhouse that comes organically for them, then they're going to be able to focus for hours at a time on it. Okay.
I feel this every day in the morning. My boys we've actually started getting them up at completely separate times because it's almost like the younger brother is the trigger for distraction, like constantly, no matter what I do, I cannot get them to not interact and to focus on like getting out the door. And so like I wake up the little one like a full half hour before I wake up the big one.
Yeah, that's smart.
He does breakfast, he brushes teeth, I put him in a room, and then I get the other one.
So we've talked about you got to manage the cognitive load, because if you have kids with dyslexia or any kind of reading struggles, ADHD, oppositional struggles, autism, just different kinds of learning differences, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, with or without labels. If they are barely getting by, if they're having to work too hard, it warms my heart. We've had so many families lately who have come in and said, my child's making good grades. I feel so bad because they have to work so hard at it. And I'm like, that is so awesome. Yes, that matters. Quality of life matters. Yep. I want to hug you, but we do need a certain amount of pressure. But that doesn't mean wagging fingers and hovering. That increases anxiety. What we mean is we need a certain amount of stress. We hear the word stress and it sounds bad, but stress has to do with, I got to get this done. If we all need a certain amount of sensory input to where I'm alert and engaged and I'm with you right now, but not so much that it's overwhelming. So if you have kids who just seem laid back, if there are kids who blend into the woodwork at school, like put your antenna up, because sometimes that is withdrawal and later on it comes out in other ways. But that laid back might really be bored, which really registers as stress. It might be like, I'm not engaged enough to even be motivated, care enough about this. We need a certain amount to get to our optimal performance, to get to that state of flow we talked about. I'm energized, I'm motivated, I'm excited about the outcome here, I'm focused. And then there is a tipping point. And then you start seeing what looks like careless errors, which may or may not be careless. It might be, I don't have any brain fuel left. It might be visual perception, but they're tired. You might see physical signs of that, or they just really are. Now I can't focus. I'm becoming less engaged. And then you have on the job, maybe it's burnout. It can be student burnout. It can be anxiety, anger, outbursts, meltdowns. That is not a choice. They are way past their tipping point, and that is how they're letting you know. But see, pressure plus adequate resources to cope is challenge. Pressure plus insufficient resources, neurodevelopmental struggles, it feels like a threat, and kids will go into a fight or flight mode. And once that happens, the amygdala that tries to keep us safe, if we have a bad guy trying to mug us, kids will go into that state without a physical threat, and they're lashing out. They might be aggressive. They might say things they would never say. It's not in keeping with their character. They might blame other people for their mistakes. They might get annoyed and frustrated more easily. They are in a self-preservation mode. And then they might pull back, and then they don't even want to leave their room or something like that. Or it's just fighting like cats and dogs to get them to do their homework.
Oh,
that tells you something. There's a difference between not wanting to do it and having these kinds of responses. Remember, behavior is communication. I am facing expectations that I don't have the toolkit to handle. And these emotions and behaviors are the way I'm conveying it to you. It's maladaptive, but sometimes it's all they've got. Sometimes if you have kids who you're like, what's going on? Why are you so, and they can't come up with it. And yet other times they're very articulate. When they are in fight or flight, and the amygdala, the fight or flight part of the brain, has hijacked the information, they may not be able to access words. That is a sign that they're overwhelmed. Not that they don't want to share. Sometimes kids don't want to share, yes. But sometimes if it's like, I don't know, or vague, whatever, fine. I don't know what to say, because they're in this state of overwhelm. So, all right, we got lots of causes here. And the bottom line is, most of the time when kids pay attention, sometimes and not others, there is a reason why. Are there certain types of times of day? How are they sleeping? What are they eating? You can go to the Googles on our page, the videos on our page, and type in attention distractibility. I've given so many tips in other shows about supplements to take, about ways to structure the environment, different things to grow these abilities.
Yes, you please check out the page. Look at the different videos that are shared. You can see Heather's handle there at The Hidden Churn. She gives out tons of tools for us to use every day for ourselves, for our kids. As you can see, these are the brain balance centers that you can contact for your assessment. If you're waiting, if you've been delaying it, don't delay it. It is just a world of difference once you get the resources and get the help. Heather, is there anything else you want to share with your audience today?
Just that Dr. Brian and I will be back Thursday at 1 o'clock. And I believe we are talking about the startle reflex. Last week we started and kind of did an overview about primitive reflexes. Go check that out if you haven't already. And this week we're talking about that fight or flight response and what's happening in the body and the brain and the emotions and the behaviors.
Awesome. So make sure you check that out. And if you're watching this on the replay, please add your questions to the comments. We will always try to answer them, and Heather will reach out to you personally sometimes. So feel free to do that, and we'll see you next time. Bye, Heather.
Bye, Jen. Bye, everyone.